Hi folks, and welcome to the Meaningful Money Podcast. This is season 15, episode 11. This is the podcast dedicated to helping you put your finances in order. My name is Pete Matthew, and I'm going to share with you everything you need to know and everything you need to do to secure your financial future. I'm here to help you make sense of money. Here we go again. Great to have you with me, folks. Thank you so much for joining me. How we behave around money has far, far greater impact on our wealth building than pretty much anything else, than our investment decisions, our level of diversification, our choices of asset allocation, whether or not we use leverage. Our behavior is the biggest factor, in my not so humble opinion. So we're going to talk about behavior today, bringing in a good friend of mine to help me do that. So after today's show, which is actually the first of two parts, okay? But after the main body of today's show, usual drill, I'll read a review that's been left and talk about what next week's discussion is going to be about. But before any of that, remember, this podcast continues to be brought to you with the help of my very kind friends at 7 Investment Management. Now, they've been helping me out here since the spring of 2011, which is just amazing. Certainly couldn't have built this to what it is without their help. So please do check out what they're up to. They're at 7im.co.uk. That's the number 7im.co.uk. And don't forget the Meaningful Money branded self-investment platform, which they have built and which may be of interest to you. So everything you need to know about that is at meaningfulmoney.tv/podcastinvest. Go check it out. Okay, so today I'm welcoming back my good friend Neil Bage of BIQ. Neil is a behavioral finance expert. BIQ is a behavioral insights company, really, and he's building some amazing things. And Neil is coming to talk us through how we cope with the various external influences when it comes to our financial behavior. So external influences. Next week we're going to be talking about the internal things that we have to deal with, the internal factors. So remember, notes and links from today's show, including in due course a transcript. It might not be available when this episode goes live, but it will be before too long. So in due course there'll be a transcript, but any links and stuff like that, all at the show notes. It's the only link you need to remember. meaningfulmoney.tv/PP11. That's for planning with purpose. Episode 11, that's the name of this season. So meaningfulmoney.tv/PP11. Let's dive straight into my conversation with Neil Bage. Well, it's great to welcome back my good friend Neil Bage, founder of BIQ, which is a behavioral insights company, and the man who knows more than anybody else that I've ever met about behavioral finance and how this stuff all works, how we react to our money. So Neil, welcome back, mate. Good to have you.
It is great to be back, and your opening words are far too kind. Do I deserve them? I don't know, but it's great to be back, Pete.
Yeah, good to have you back, man. I'm just softening you up, that's all. So I want to sort of come up with, I want to deal with two sort of aspects, really. This whole season is about folks who are in the what I call the long middle. They've got their savings discipline well established. They understand how investments work, and they're doing all the right things. But it can take a long time to reach financial independence, right? So, and there's all kinds of sort of threats and factors and influences and stuff as we go along. So I want to deal a little bit with the sort of external stuff we have to deal with it. And as we're talking, look, we need to just remember that we're not talking with novices here. These are people who've been investing for a long time. And then I want to sort of dig down into the internal, our inner voice and all that sort of stuff that throws at us as well. So I wonder, when it comes to external influences, the things that impact on our sense of well-being, perhaps, or the way we interact with our money, what would you say the biggest factors are, externally speaking?
Every time I think of this question or questions like this, you kind of revert back to your training when you joined companies and they talk about external factors. So they use that. What's that? Is it PESTLE? That acronym? Oh, yeah. For external factors of impacting businesses. So what is that? Political, economical, social, technological, legal, and environmental, I think.
Well done.
I tell you, hey, it's all active up here. But I think And I think some of them are true, right? So of course, people invest their money and they are in it for the long haul and they hope to achieve financial well-being. At the end of it, all of the stuff that you know and your listeners know about. But actually, we can't ignore the fact that the world goes on around us, right? And we see the world around us happening through TV, through listening to radio, in the car on the way into work, all of this stuff. And all of these external messages, all of these signals that we receive have an impact on how we perceive the world. And actually, and I know we'll talk about this more on the internal side, but actually how it impacts the way we make decisions. So you can't help, or it's really difficult to ignore what's going on politically, right? It's really difficult to do that. It's difficult if the economy was absolutely tanking. It would be incredibly difficult to ignore that fact and not think about how that's going to impact your wealth and your long-term financial plans. You may turn the news on and see that the stock markets are falling. You can't help but think, how's that going to impact me? Yes, there are specific factors, and we could probably wrap them up with that pestle model. When I talk about this stuff, I just say to people, we need to be just conscious that we aren't. Neil Bage isn't in a world of one. Neil Bage is in a world of millions, billions of people, and I therefore need to be conscious that I need to interact with that world that's around me, and that world will throw information and stuff at me, and I need to understand what to allow in, what's relevant, and not kind of just go with what's salient. I need to try and ignore some of the noise, if you like. I think just that we need to be aware that the world happens around us, and there are many factors, not just a handful, that will impact the way we see the world and make decisions.
Sure, the political one seems to be absolutely endless at the minute, doesn't it?
Isn't it ridiculous?
Yeah, exactly. So it's changing every single day, and yet not. Don't seem to be any further forth.
Exactly.
Obviously, more than ever before, we're in just a 24/7 news society. We wake up to notifications on our phones, and if we're on Twitter, it's like a sort of living pulse of humanity, and you hear about it there before the news networks sort of hear about it. And I wonder, how do you think that affects us in terms of our emotions and our behavior towards our wealth building?
I think I was talking about this at a conference recently, and I said, whilst I, where is it here? Whilst I love having this thing with me, right? It's the biggest pain in my backside as well.
Absolutely.
Because it allows me an immediate and non-stop connection with the outside world. And whilst I think that's good in some respects, I think it can be all-consuming in other respects, and that's not good, right? It's not good at all. But I tell you what I think has become, and I think this has slipped us by in a conscious way, actually, but I'll tell you what I think has become one of the biggest problems is the way that we can now self-curate our news. So before, when you and I were lads, you turn one of the 4 terrestrial channels on, or 3 actually.
Yeah. I remember Channel 4 being launched.
I do, and you would turn the news at 6 on, and the news at 6 would be the news. The other way you would get that news is listening to the radio every hour, or by buying a newspaper the following morning, right? And that was pretty much it, really. And then the 24-hour news channels launched, of course they did, but then the internet happened properly. And where we are in 2019, going into 2020, is we have the ability now, because of the way that iPhones and laptops work, is they know what we're looking at. So what happens is when I turn my iPhone on now and I open up a new tab for the news, I'm presented with headlines based on my current news reading trends, if you like. So I now see, so imagine someone who just looks at bad news. Imagine someone who's always clicking on those horrible news stories. Well, what happens now is their apps are delivering news stories of similar ilk to them the second they open up their phone. So what happens is this self-curation of news kind of puts us into it's a confirmation bias state, because all we're ever seeing is news that supports the kind of the beliefs and the worries and the anxieties I have about the world anyway. So I think whilst it's great to be informed of what's going on in the world in real time, sometimes I do think it can be completely overwhelming. And I don't think people pause enough to realize how overwhelming the constant bombardment of news can be to our psyche. It can have a significant impact on us, and it can start to rewire the way we see the world, which ultimately will have an impact on our wealth building.
It's bound to, isn't it? I mean, it's. I was watching the Netflix documentary, The Great Hack. I don't know if you've seen that. It's the whole Cambridge Analytica thing, and
I haven't seen it. I've seen the trailer for it.
Yeah, do. It's very enlightening and also a little bit terrifying. Just how manipulated we can be, and how obviously little controls there are on that, and how dependent really we are on the big social networks specifically to police themselves there, which obviously you can imagine the task it is for Facebook to police every post that goes on there. It's an impossible task, actually. It's become too big. So I wonder if there is an argument for sort of trying to avoid that self-curation, because as you say, it's largely done for us very often by algorithm. We click on a couple of things, we get served up similar things. It's one of the reasons I like the FT as a news source. It's sort of gloriously unemotional. It's just like, here are the numbers and this is what we think it means. Not perfect, of course. But we obviously, I think it's obviously, if we start from the point of view that there's going to be bias in absolutely every news source, and as we become adults we become aware of that and not just take what's spoon-fed us, that's obviously an important discipline, I think, that we just need to sort of filter what we hear. Is there anything else sort of practical we can do to sort of minimize the impact of this sort of negative news flow?
I think I actually think what you just said hits the nail on the head. So I'm self-curation of news is fine, but as long as you adopt some kind of guiding principles, I guess, and one of them is, and this is a principle I live by, and I have for a number of years now, which is I will only make a decision where when I can, of course, because I'm still human. I still fall for framing and anchoring and all of these things, right? But I try my hardest to make decisions based on nothing or as much fact as I possibly can. I very rarely make a decision based on somebody else's opinion of the world, because it's an opinion. So I look for evidence where I can. I'm not saying I spend hours on every decision, but I do try, if I think it's important and it'll have an impact on me or my wife or the life that I live, then I will invest a little bit more time and effort in trying to find the facts that I need to underpin the decision that I'm about to make. And everybody can do that, because whilst the internet does self-curate news for us, it's also an amazing wealth of knowledge at our fingertips if we learn how to navigate that properly. So I would do that. I would be really conscious as well of avoiding the crowd. So kind of doing just what everybody else is doing because everybody else is doing it. And I think we need to stop and take a moment to think, actually, just because everybody is doing this, is that really right for me and for my life? So I think we can put these little pauses in place just to reflect just for a second. But I tell you, one of the things, and I say this with all sincerity, having a trusted advisor by your side. Now, whether that is a financial advisor or a incredibly close friend who you trust implicitly to always tell you the truth and who is looking out for you, having that trusted advisor in your life can just be the sounding board you need when you're making important decisions and there's a lot of external noise going on. Just to say to them, what do you think? What's your views? And this is what I think. And as long as that becomes an evidence-based relationship, then I think that can have a significant impact in a positive on the way that you navigate the world.
That's a great advice, actually, and something I sometimes think we've become increasingly insular, and it's sort of our view very often is sort of me against the world sort of thing, and that's not necessarily healthy. And so opening up to somebody, but of course that's an extremely trusting relationship. So as you say, a very close friend, or a relationship that you're paying for, and hence that person is on the hook for what they tell you. I think sometimes that's a way of, with a professional financial advice relationship, that's another way of ensuring, one would hope, some kind of objectivity. but obviously it's still a huge amount of trust to put in somebody. We tend to, obviously, we're sort of social animals, and we live in very often family groups, obviously, whether that's actual biological familial groups or very sort of close groups of friends, co-workers. Even we spend a lot of time at the office or wherever we work, and those folks can be a factor as well, and particularly obviously our significant others if applicable. The influence of those people is immense, isn't it? How can we be sure that we're navigating that carefully?
Okay, this is another interesting question, because actually you are absolutely right. We interact, so we interact with the world, but actually then we have that kind of the next circle in, if you like, where we allow people into our lives, and of course even the inner circle, if you like, which is our partners and our closest friends, etc. But they all have an influence on how we see the world and make decisions. It's interesting. There's a particular behavioural bias called authority bias, where we look up to different people, and just because they're in a position of authority, we kind of believe that the information and the information that they give us has more credence than somebody who is not in authority. And it's quite I remember. So I know we've mentioned growing up twice now. Right? I'm about to mention it the second time. You remember when we were kids, right? You would see a policeman walking down the street, and you would kind of think, "Oh my God, there's a policeman." And certain people in society just held these figures of authority, figures of authority that we just looked up to, and whatever they said, you kind of said, "Okay, if they've said it, then it must be true." And that carries through to today. That there are people in authority that we listen to, and we just say, "Okay, that must be true because they've said it." But the more you go in that circle, if you like, the more complicated it becomes, and the more difficult it becomes just to say, "I'm not listening to you." So if my wife comes in and says, "Neil, I think we should look at our mortgage because I think we're paying too much, and I heard that there's better deals, blah, blah, blah," that conversation is very different. It's a much more personal conversation than if I get told that by a friend who said, "Oh, I'm just changing my mortgage. I've seen there's a better deal. Have you done your mortgage recently?" Those conversations are differently. I take them in different ways. I process them in different ways, and they therefore deliver a different outcome potentially. You know what, Pete? I think this is really an interesting question because of something I was reading about recently, and about financial coercion.
Coercion, right? Okay.
Yeah, and that basically it's becoming. I think it's always been there. I just think it's becoming more prominent, more visible now. And that's where, Sandy, my wife, comes to me and she says, "Oh, Neil, I think we should look at the mortgage." And my response to her is, "I deal with the money in this house. You don't need to worry. Go along your little merry way and enjoy, go and walk the dog or do whatever you need to do. Because the finances are all about, I deal with them." And it becomes an issue where one partner in that relationship controls the purse completely. And I think as financial advisors, or the financial advisors who may listen to this will probably experience that actually, that when they're sitting down with couples, it becomes pretty clear that one of those couples talks much more than the other.
Always. Almost always. Yeah, more often than not, certainly.
Yeah, and I bet you, and I don't know this, so I'm completely hypothesizing here. I bet you it's the man.
More often than not, although I'm seeing a trend of a reversal there, but it just depends, Yeah,
brilliant.
Every family's different.
Okay, yeah, okay. So I think that is another issue, another factor that we need to be aware of. How does that kind of partner relationship work really, and is it a shared relationship from a financial perspective? Do they have open conversations? Because all of these things will impact on their ultimate collective wealth.
Oh yeah, it's challenging that. I mean, a couple of Facebook groups other than my own, I get this question in my own quite a bit. But I mean, one particular Facebook group is a Dave Ramsey Facebook group. So Dave Ramsey, American sort of financial guru, but most folks in that group are in the paying down debt stage, and it's a repeated question. It's like, how do I get my other half on board? How can we have these conversations? I get asked it frequently as well. I think sometimes people can influence us in different ways, of course. So the influence of a partner who maybe is not very involved with it. It's almost an influence by omission. It's like, actually, sometimes it would be good to be challenged and have these conversations, and it's like the opposite of a very domineering partner then, who, just, as you said, like, don't you worry your pretty little head about it or something, I've got this under control. That neither is healthy. I wonder whether you can speak to that. Well, let me sort of frame the question. Let's say it's reversed, that actually our partner is, say, struggling. Maybe they're reading a whole load of negative press. Maybe they're worried about their pension or the family finances in light of Brexit or whatever. Have you got anything, any sort of pointers as to how we might have those conversations and how we might help our significant others in this kind of situation?
This is it's an intricate dance, right?
Yeah.
The answer, I think the answer is, so I can only go on my life.
Yeah, of course.
Right? And the relationship that I have with my wife. So I'm in my mid-40s. I was married when I was 21. I have a very open relationship with my wife. We talk about everything. We share everything. And that was very conscious of a conscious decision. Or wasn't it even conscious decision?
Yeah.
I think we just grew into that,
yeah.
Pete. I think
us too, yeah.
Early on, we just shared everything and we had open conversations. And that's still true to this day when it comes to finances. So Sandy will say things to me that she's seen on the news, and we will just have honest adult conversations about it. And I will offer my view of how I've interpreted that and what I may have researched and found out about, and she'll offer her view. And together we'll talk through some of the big issues that impact the pair of us. And then we will often come to a collective decision. And actually, that's really held us in good stead from a financial perspective, because some of the ideas I have, and of course we have different risk profiles as well, some of the decisions I think we should be taking are often countered or made better, actually, by the input that she gives. So I think the answer is, whilst it is an intricate dance, and and of course in the UK, one of the things that we rarely talk about is money. It's not like Sandy and I sit down and open up bank accounts and say, right, whilst we're having our spaghetti bolognese, let's have a chat about our joint account. You just don't do it, right? We put it off. We don't want to talk about it. But when we do talk about it, as long as we can be adult and have that open conversation, then from my experience, that is a really fruitful way to approach these things. Else, shutting someone down or not taking their opinion, you could just, not only could you be doing your partnership a disservice, you could be doing yourself a disservice, because there's often nuggets of information in the exchanges that we have with people that are really close to us. So that, I guess, if it's not advice, that's just an experience I've had that worked for me.
Yeah. There's a bit of a little dance around this whole subject, because, I'm not a marriage counsellor or relationship counsellor or anything like that. And I think everybody finds their own way. But I think particularly, I think there is a responsibility on if in a partnership one has taken more of the lead, I think there's a responsibility on that person to actively involve the other, even sometimes if they don't want to, but just to nurture that in them, because not only will it be good for them, it'll actually be good for you, the more dominant one necessarily, just because it does bring in an extra perspective. Certainly that's been the case in my marriage. I've learned to trust Joanne's intuition implicitly. She has an annoying habit of absolutely getting to the point that we needed to discuss without any fluff, whereas I might be sort of more likely to sort of couch it in my knowledge of the financial services industry, all that sort of stuff, which is utter rubbish. Of course, she always gets to the point. So we just got to find our way through this, but relationships come first. So, it needs to be done thoughtfully, respectfully, and all that sort of stuff. It's, one of life's big challenges.
The thing to add to that is, what we need to be be conscious of again is when you're having these conversations with your partner. So when I'm having these conversations with Sandy, what she says to me and what I say to her has no malice or ill feeling in it at all. It's about trying to find a solution that is beneficial to the pair of us. That's not necessarily true for people who are in the next circle out, because actually their advice and their views may be loaded and maybe biased to other things as well. So the only person, the reason why I think fostering that conversation with your partner is so important is because you're both on the same journey together. You're both heading to the same destination.
Yeah.
And you're both doing that at the same time. Therefore, you should create this an environment of trust and conversation and collaboration in order to make important financial decisions. I think that is absolutely what people should be working towards if they're not doing that already.
Yeah, wise words, mate. Absolutely. That special, very much inner circle relationship with our partner is different to those even immediate family. You know, they are a circle apart from the ones who were.
Yeah, it is.
And it is down to the fact that you're working together towards the same goal. That's powerful stuff, man. I want to just talk about the financial services industry because, you know, we get a lot of messages from them as well. Whether we work with an advisor or not, if we have an interest in building wealth and in investing, we are consuming stuff put out by the industry, which is obviously self-serving. I wonder how sort of ordinary folks, lay people, if you like, can sort of pass the good stuff, the useful information, and filter out the stuff which is necessarily biased. Is there a way that folks can do that, really? Is it even possible?
Oh, you've prodded the bear here.
Go for it, man. Let loose. That's fine.
This is a bugbear of mine, and it always has been. So the industry, customers come to us, and they come to us with an ambition, a dream, a vision of how they want their life to be, and they come to us and say, "Can you help me realize that dream?" And you know, the work you do and other advisors do is absolutely in that is your role, right? To help them live the life that they want to live from today, the second they walk in the door, to the second they leave this beautiful earth. But as an industry, what we do is I think sometimes and I'm speaking about the industry broadly here, I think sometimes we are so full of our own self-importance, trying to show the world how intelligent we are and how clever we are, that we put information out for the world to consume. And they look at it and they go, what the hell does that mean? I don't know what that means. And and by doing this, what we're doing is we're putting people into a kind of a back foot situation, because they're not starting on a front foot, they're starting on a back foot of needing to make an important decision that will have an impact on their life, yet using information that they don't really understand. So they've got to try and make head or tail of what's in front of them in the first place. And that is notoriously difficult, because where they try and find more information to help them, all they're met with is just this layer upon layer upon layer of complexity and jargon and difficult language. And you know the score, right? And it really annoys me, because out of many industries in this world, we seem to be obsessed with producing information that is just difficult to understand. And I find that, and then that leads to the industry saying, "Oh, what we should be doing is we should be delivering financial education," and that is not the holy grail. That's not the answer. It needs to be two things: educate people so that yes, they understand a bit more, but make the world that they interact with easier to interact with in the first place. You know, so passing the good stuff. And you know, are trying to focus on the good stuff and ignore the negative, bad stuff is actually not made easy for them by the industry generally. But that's where their knights in shining armor step up and they say, "Let me act as a translator. I can translate this stuff for you. I can figure out what you need to know and what you don't need to know. I can read that document and tell you exactly what it means in plain, simple English." So whilst I keep going back to the same point, there are times in your life when you are trying to plan for your future that you need someone by your side, you know, and that could be someone, like I said earlier, to help you figure out the world and to be a sounding board, to be a consigliere, if you know, in a mafia term, you know, someone who you can just trust to give you the right advice.
Yeah.
But it could also be someone who acts as a translator for what's going on in the world. And you say, do you know what this means? oh yeah, it means this. Oh, that's not what that says, but okay, now you've told me.
No, it makes sense. Yeah.
It makes sense, and I can make a decision. So I think there's a language barrier in the industry that we need to knock down. But you and your fellow advisors and planners can help do that. And I would say this again with being very genuine. I think the best way to make important financial decisions where there is a lot of financial information being thrown at you is to work with someone who understands this stuff, who can cut through the noise, and who can say to you, that's what you need to understand, and allow them to make better informed decisions.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I'm encouraged by the amount of good information that's out there now, but it is still quite hard to find it. Obviously, you've got this podcast, and you've got some other outstanding ones like Money to the Masses, Informed Choice Radio, Maven Advisor, Financial Wellbeing. There's some great sources now, and I mean, if I, for example, if I talk about Money to the Masses, my good friend Damien Fay and Andy and the team there, I know Damien. He's a mate, right? And so I know that his motives are good, right? I mean, he's got a business to run, don't get me wrong, but his motivation, like mine for starting, was, people just need to understand this stuff so that they can go into any financial decision with their eyes open. And I know that's the same with Andy Hart and Chris Bird of Financial Wellbeing and, Martin Bamford of Informed Choice. I know these guys, but obviously for the listeners, they don't. And so we need to have our sort of bullshit radar, if you'll forgive me, fairly finely tuned. And so I think we need to, firstly, you said it earlier on, don't take anything at face value, but just sort of consider it, chew it over, maybe get the input of a trusted friend onto that. Don't make decisions quickly. Don't listen to one episode of a podcast and say, oh, this guy clearly knows what he's talking about. We need to get behind it and dig into the story behind some of these people and get to know the folks as best we can. One of the things that pleases me most whenever I sort of do a meetup and actually meet sort of folks who listen to the show in real life, they all say, oh, actually, you're exactly the same as you come across on the podcast. It's like, yeah, right. It's just me. And it can be hard to sometimes get that from online sources, but I think we need to trust our gut. I keep saying that, I think generally we're pretty good. I'm sure there's a more sort of scientifically correct name that for that. There's some sort of bias or behavior that you would put on it, Neil.
It sounds exactly right to me. I stood up at a conference recently and I was talking and I said, what we need to remember, what we need to remember is that over the 3.5 million years that we've evolved as a species, our gut and trusting it has got us to where we are today. We have, as a species, a finely tuned intuition. You can sit in a room with people and you can look across at someone and you can look at them and you can go, there's something about them I just don't trust. And that's because we are able to read multiple signals coming in and millions of years of evolution have taught us that I think I might steer clear of them. Oh, they look really nice and friendly. I think I'll approach them. Not saying that's right, by the way, but I'm just confirming that I agree with what you said. That actually trust your gut. You'll figure out who the good people are and who the bad people are. We've done it for millions of years.
I think half the battle is being aware of these things, isn't it? If we're aware that we're constantly bombarded by influences, then that's half the battle. Can you just remind me of the PESTLE acronym that you said at the start? Just I think it might help people just to remind themselves of what these things are. Political, yeah. Putting you on the spot.
So it is political, economical, social, technological, legal, environmental.
Legal and environmental. Okay, I'll have a look into that because that's not something I've heard before, and I'll just sort of dig into that a little bit and maybe comment on it. Okay, Neil, that's going to be okay for this week. So we're going to come back and we're going to talk about our internal monologue, I don't know, but the way that we deal with a lot of this stuff internally. Okay, let me just sort of wrap up a little bit here very quickly. I don't want to sort of step on Neil's points or anything like that. I just want to summarize, really. So I call this the everything you need to do section, right? The sort of action points. So firstly, we need to accept that we are human. Accept our humanity, but learn to filter what's coming in. So we need to understand we live in a real world. Be conscious that interaction with real human beings is inevitable and indeed a desirable part of life. But we need to try and learn to filter the inputs that are inevitable, at least where we can. Half of that battle is to be aware of them. So Neil used that PESTLE acronym to summarize the sort of areas where we might find these inputs. And again, half the battle is to be aware. So political, hot topic right now, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental. Pretty much every sphere of life, you could say. So we just need to be aware of those influences and try to learn to filter them. Okay. Second thing we need to do is to self-curate our news in a positive way. We know how much the big social networks tailor our feeds based on stuff we've already viewed or watched or read and liked and all that sort of stuff, to show us more of that stuff. So it's a form of confirmation bias. We can end up with a feed which just already confirms what we're already thinking. So we need to try and sort of hack this in our favor, if you like. So seek out factual sources of news where possible. At least try and find as objective ones as possible. Steer clear of the relentlessly negative stuff. It'll do you no good in the grand scheme of things. Try to build yourself a news feed which reinforces good behavior. And try to build balance as well, where possible. Okay? Join the Meaningful Money Facebook group, meaningfulmoney.tv/community. That will help because it's a good mix of people in there, but relentlessly helpful people as well. So that will help you. Third thing we need to do is to seek out a trusted advisor. As Neil said, there doesn't have to be a regulated financial advisor, just someone who we trust, that we can bounce ideas off, bounce decisions off before we make them, whose input we respect, and who we know has our best interests at heart. I saw an Instagram post the other day saying you don't need a financial advisor, just seek your sort of best friend and ask them what they'd do with their money. What utter rubbish that is. Of course, your best friend may be phenomenal with money, in which case that is a good thing to do, but your best friend might also be completely broke because they've bought into the whole, debt is normal, car leasing is a good idea, live for today, don't worry about tomorrow kind of point of view. So you don't need that kind of influence. So choose your influences wisely. And on that note, watch out for authority bias. We have a tendency to place more weight on the opinion of people in a position of authority or perceived authority over us. We need to be careful about this because that person might not know our situation. They may not have a clue about what they're on about in our particular area in which we're struggling, like our finances. So watch out for authority bias, placing too much weight on people's opinions. Fifth thing we need to do, let's never be guilty of financial coercion. We need to be really careful to foster healthy discussions around money with our significant other, if applicable. Never ever put pressure on your partner, and never accept pressure either, or dismissal about financial matters from them. Conversations with our partner, little frog in the throat there. Conversations with our partner should be working towards the same end, surely. So even if we structure our finances somewhat separately, if we're building a life together, building our financial lives together too, we should be working together, okay? So it needs to be a collaboration to at least some extent. But that isn't necessarily true of the next circle out, Neil said, in our family and other relationships. And we need to be aware of that, not place too much weight on like what our parents think, right? They're less important than our significant other, if that is applicable to you. So understand the different dynamics of the different people in our lives and the conversations that we have with them. We need to always be questioning, folks, I think. Excuse me, that frog has returned. Always be questioning and always asking why and questioning motivation and things like that, and trying to seek out the objective route in it all. Not always easy, I know. And the sixth thing you might need to consider is to seek professional advice. There are times when the only way to put yourself in the best position to make the optimum decision about your finances is to pay somebody else to make it for you or give you a steer, all right? So just some action points there in dealing with the external influences as we build wealth for the future. So Neil's coming back next week, as we talked about. So more on that in a minute. So here's a couple of reviews actually, because they're quite short. This is from Katie Joy 0514 from the States. Hi, Katie. Money magic, she says. Pete and his wide variety of knowledgeable guests are making financial management viable. The great advice they provide, combined with the relatable way in which they deliver it, had me hooked from the very first listen. Thanks for putting out such a stellar show, Pete. Keep up the great work. Thank you, Katie Joy. And this is from somebody who clearly just sort of ran their fingers over the keyboard when putting in their username because it's but they simply say, thank you for the Millennial series. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. So, well, you're welcome. You're welcome, you're welcome, you're welcome. I'm glad it was helpful. So if you're liking what you're hearing, then please do leave me a review, meaningfulmoney.tv/iTunes. If you're an Apple person, if not, then wherever you're listening to this, please do leave me a review. Keeps me near the top of the rankings, which really, really helps. You know what, before I record the next one, definitely going to have to have a coughing fit, I think. So anyway, next time, we're back with Neil again, and we're talking specifically about the internal factors that we need to be aware of when we're making financial decisions. So stay tuned for that. Any comments on today's show, then leave them at the show notes, which is meaningfulmoney.tv/pp11. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed it, folks. I've really enjoyed picking Neil's brains. He knows his onions, believe me. So you can always ask questions at the show notes, and Neil, I'm sure, will jump in and answer. So stay tuned for more of Neil next week. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you next week. Cheers.